All right, so what's going on, guys? So in today's video, I'm going to go over a quick install of a couple Miata parts I actually got for this car. Now, of course, at this point, this car is made up of literally like 6 different cars. Of course, the head is from a Hyundai, the transmission is from the Eclipse, the harness is from another year Galant, and of course, there's some Evo sprinkled in there as well. So why not throw another one in the mix and get some parts made for the Miata? So I guess to be fair, the difference with these and those other parts is that these parts were more designed for the Miata, not from a Miata. So what I'm going to be doing today is installing my oil feed line and a sandwich plate adapter and the Miata oil filter and get my battery at least in place. So of course I'm going to go over to my bench over here. It's kind of dirty, so you have to excuse that. I'm going to show you guys why I chose the Miata filter. All right, guys, so of course here you have the oil filter that I pulled off the car. And if you go to an auto parts store, you look up the number, all these filters are going to be about the same dimension. And this is the one for the Miata. As you can see, it's probably about ½ an inch shorter, and everything else is about the same. And of course, this will thread on just like this one will. Now, when we're looking at, I have this old sandwich plate here, and this was made by Glow Shift. And a sandwich plate is really a pretty simple piece, so you don't need to spend a lot of money, in my opinion, on it. And you can see this piece, again, is about 1 inch. So if I just screw this down real quick, and that's not all the way tight. So you can see overall, you can see the height difference. So you can tell just overall, you're gaining probably about ½ an inch or so in total height by using the shorter filter with the oil filter. And that's really just for ground clearance because of where the oil filter is on the Galant, how it's on the bottom of the engine. So is this really necessary? Probably not. It really just depends on how low your car is going to be and how much ground clearance you're comfortable with having. And a lot of cars use this same thread. So there are probably more options out there. Like I said, I just looked it up. Quick search found that the Miata fit and was shorter. I think on my old GSX, I might have used an Outlander oil filter, which was actually wider, if I remember correctly, than the factory one. I think it was a little bit shorter. So that may be an option as well. A few things you want to keep in mind is you want to make sure you use either one of these two. Either use some like PFT thread tape or some thread sealer. Now, personally, I'm going to use this thread sealer just because I just like to using it. Pretty much everywhere you have a connection. A lot of times people complain about these things leaking, and it's really not the product's fault, it's just the person's fault for the install. So you have these plugs here. You want to make sure that these get a good amount of thread tape or sealer. So basically anything that you plug into this, you want to go ahead and use one of these two products. So for me, these two on the outside will be plugged, and this will be for oil feed and oil pressure. And you want to make sure you get some oil, and you want to rub it on this gasket before you tighten it all the way down. That'll help everything seal up. But this is what you have here. If I can get a good angle on it, you can see that the lowest point of the oil filter is sitting just above the bottom of the oil pan. My standard oil filter is going to hang down below the oil filter. So that's the benefits of doing this. Again, it's not necessary. It just depends on how comfortable you are with it. And while we're down here, you can see how I ran my feed line. So what I have is a sandwich plate, followed by there's a 1/8 MPT to 4AN fitting, and of course your 4AN line that runs up to the turbo, to the top of the turbo. So it's going to be running, and I'll get some zip ties along this frame rail here. And of course I was zip tied to keep it away from all these moving parts down here. And this particular sandwich plate actually has a total of 4 ports. It also comes with 4 plugs. So I went ahead and blocked off 2 of them, the ones on the side. And of course I'm using one for my oil feed, and then that other one that's to the left of it will be used for my oil pressure gauge. And of course I just chose those 2 because the one behind it is right there near the axle, which could be a clearance issue. And again, you choose which port you're going to use just based off of the clearance you have. Now you can turn this filter any way because it tightens down based off of how tight. So if you wanted to clock it a different direction, you would just loosen the oil filter a little, and then you'll be able to turn that plate and then tighten the oil filter back up. So you can see I put thread sealing on everything. Just gonna give that a few minutes to dry. I'm gonna go ahead and install my oil filter, my oil pressure gauge, and get some zip ties and wrap this up. All right, guys, so I actually didn't show you this, but I ended up not using zip ties. Once I put the heat wrap on the feed line, I went ahead and just drilled a little small hole in that metal, and then use one of those P clamps that I got, and that's gonna hold that line in place and keep it away from those belts. So what this is they're just these thin stainless steel clamps. They have a bit of rubber on the inside just to protect whatever you're clamping. And I use these in combination with these bolts, to kind of fix that to it. So these do a pretty decent job. You can get these from a lot of places. These particular ones came off Amazon. Only gripe with these is you can't really make this hole bigger. With one of them, I attempted to drill the hole out so I could use a factory bolt hole, and it ended up just twisting this metal up. So you're pretty much limited to using the ones that came with it, which is kind of unfortunate, but these do the job. Again, and they weren't expensive. So of course that link will be in the description. Anyway, back to what we're doing. All right, guys. So installing the oil plate is a pretty quick install, especially if the oil is already drained. Like I said, just keep in mind a couple things that you want to make sure that you put either thread tape or a sealer or whatever on all of those connections so they don't leak. Except for any AN to AN connections. Of course, that fitting I use, it has a 1/8 MPT thread on one side and then AN on the other. So I just put the sealer on the MPT side and not on the AN side because you do not need, you don't need it there. And to try to keep your clearances in mind, always allow for extra space. Like everything in the engine bay moves, so you want to keep that in mind when you're installing stuff so that it's not super tight. And the reason I went ahead and used that shield on my oil feed line is just because there's a lot of heat in there, and that is a PTFE line. I didn't want the heat to potentially damage the plastic that's inside of the rubber hose. So that's just a little extra bit of insurance for me. But now we're going to go ahead and get over to the battery. All right, so for a battery and to help, save space and drop a little bit of weight, I went with this unit right here. But this is actually a battery for the Mazda Miata. And it's quite a bit smaller than like the factory unit or most other batteries without going with like a full-on small race battery. So the reason I went with this is because you can find these batteries pretty much everywhere. AutoZone, Walmart, Advanced, whatever. They're pretty easy to find and they can be had for like 100, 120 bucks. I know a lot of times those places are offering either discounts or, rebates or whatever on these. So they can be found pretty much everywhere for pretty cheap. And again, they're pretty small. Now, one thing when you run the battery this small, you do sacrifice on your cold cranking amps. You can see this one is only 370. Because again, the battery itself is just small. And of course, I know Optimum makes one that's like 3 cells. But again, that's quite a bit. That's almost twice as much as this battery. All right, so this is the battery out of the Eclipse. So side by side, you can see there's actually a noticeable difference. From the front, you can see the Miata battery is a little bit smaller. Again, like I said, we were looking at, maybe 7.5 inches, just under 7.5 inches. Whereas the Eclipse battery is just over 7, let's call it 7 5/8. So it's not a whole lot of difference as far as the length. But when we look at it from the top, we can see, again, the Eclipse battery is right at, again, maybe 7 3/4. The Miata battery is at 5 inches. And of course, the height is not gonna be a whole lot different. Again, you're looking at maybe 1/2 inch there. But the depth is really where you save space. So when doing my research, I was actually looking at using a Honda battery because I know they're about half the size of a traditional battery. Now, the Eclipse doesn't use a huge battery anyway. And this right here is actually a mock-up that we made of a Honda battery. It's actually out of Trey's Integra. It gives me the rough dimensions. Again, and the top of this is actually the top of the post, not the top of the battery itself. So you can see the Honda, the Honda half battery next to the Miata and the Eclipse. Overall, the Honda is quite a bit taller. But at least compared to the depth, again, of the Eclipse battery, the Honda battery is going to be a little bit bigger and it'll probably provide more cold cranking amps. If height is an issue on your build, and I may be moving my battery tray, again, the Miata battery is probably a good choice. When I had this kind of in place of when I was mocking it up, it was going to give me some issues with hood clearance, which is why I decided to go with the smaller Miata battery. And I'm not really worried about cold cranking amps because this car won't be driven a whole lot in the winter. Just something to consider here. You really have 3 options. You can make your intercooler piping work around this battery, but of course this battery is lighter and smaller and and just more compact. And of course, like I said, if you're moving it to a different location, you may want to use the Honda battery, which should, because it's a bigger battery, have more cold cranking amps. All right, guys, so here's the Miata battery installed. Of course, as you can see, it's still a tight fit. Of course, this is 3-inch intercooler piping, but right now the Miata battery is just sitting on the stock battery tray. Now, so I didn't have to do anything with that as far as the battery was concerned. I did cut about 3 inches off of the edge of the battery tray just to allow for my IAT sensor because I wanted to keep it on the bottom and pretty much out of sight. You're going to end up running into clearance issues with the battery tray with that sensor there. But of course, you can't see the IAT sensor, and that's why I wanted to go with that location. So of course, if you look down there, you can see the factory bracket doesn't really utilize the space as well as it could. So I'm definitely planning on modifying this at some point to move it slightly over towards the fuse box because there's about you know, an inch or so gap of space I could use that will move it closer to this frame rail. But for now, this works. Of course, when you take it to the track, you plan on tracking it, you're gonna need a battery tie down. So for that, what I did was just cut the factory one, shorten it down to length, and I'm gonna reuse this once I get done modifying that. And this will serve as my battery tie down. Now, of course, my luck being what it is, I started to weld it. I actually put a little rod in the inside of it just to help support it. As I was welding it, I ran out of wire as I was doing it. So I got enough wire. I ended up having enough wire to get a couple tacks on here, but that's it. So this is gonna have to stay like this. That's why the tape's on it until I can get you know, up to Harbor Freight to grab some more welding wire. All right, guys, so that's all I got for you today. Thank you for watching my video. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Have a great day.